All right, 1980s, the time of my childhood. Boy, oh boy, man, is some of this stuff going to bring up some memories for me. Okay, so for those of you who don't know, the guy in the bottom left, President Ronald Reagan. Bottom right, Michael Jackson. Top left, you have a boom box, and top right, you have one of the first Apple computers. Oh yeah, Rubik's Cube, Pac-Man, Nintendo, and the DeLorean. All right, this car right here makes time travel possible. Just in case you guys didn't know. All right, so what happens in 1980? We have who we believe, not we, but who many people believe is the heart and soul and pretty much the basis of all Republican ideals, President Ronald Reagan. He was an actor. Early on, we learned about him in one of the videos we watched a quick snippet from, that he was president of the Screen Actors Guild Award. But Ronald Reagan comes in as a strong Republican asking voters, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? Now, what's the first taste of Ronald Reagan that Americans get? Check this out. Right? Look at this. Remember Jimmy Carter couldn't go to Iran and get the hostages released? On the day of Reagan's inauguration, the day he becomes president, January 20th, 1981, Iran finally released the American hostages after 444 days. I was wrong last time. I said 383. That was off the top of the head guess. But 444 days of captivity, the Iranian hostages are released. The American hostages in Iran are released. Even the Iranians didn't, respect Jimmy Carter enough to release the hostages. So when he becomes president, people are like, oh my gosh, look at what he did. His very first day of office, just in a couple of minutes, the hostages are released. So Reagan is just kind of like Nixon in his ideals. Okay, he has a lot of conservative ideas. He wants to cut taxes, especially for the rich. He promises to scale back the size of the government, make it a small government, bring back that laissez-faire. He encourages expansions of key industries, reducing government regulations. You're going to see that in the defense area and oil and stuff like that. He appoints conservative justices to the Supreme Court, like Sandra Day O'Connor, who was the first woman in the Supreme Court, to back his ideas. So Reagan is setting himself up for success when he becomes president. The next one we got here, we have the pictures of some of these hostages that were released. I mean, look at this. 52 Americans were held hostage by Iranian militants during the Iran hostage crisis. And finally, on the day of his inauguration, they get released. How do these photographs show the experiences of the hostages? I might use that for a strategy for you guys. Good call. All right, so now we're going to get into his economic plan. Remember when Reagan starts taking office, the economy's not doing very well because of all that stagflation during the 1970s. So check out what Reagan does. This is called Reaganomics. This is Reagan's economics plan for America. And this is something that you're going to have to know, Reaganomics, because it's something that presidents still try to do today. All right? Reaganomics is called supply-side economics, or what we know today as trickle-down economics. Basically, what it does is if you cut the taxes for all the people up on top, all the big businesses, all the rich guys, well, those rich guys will have more money to invest in businesses and people, give more jobs. That's the theory, that this investment would create more jobs. The guys at the top have a lot more money in their pockets because of their tax cuts, and they take that money and in turn turn it into more business and more jobs. And over time, that's supposed to increase tax revenues for the government. Reaganomics. Will it work? Well, I think if it does, it takes a long time to work. The idea is good if it works, the way it's supposed to, but will it ever work? If you were one of those really rich really rich guys who gets this tax cut, are you going to sit there and build a new business and hire a lot more people and spend a lot more money? Or are you going to buy yourself a new yacht, airplane, or enjoy yourself and pocket the money? One thing that I mentioned before is spending on defense. Look at how much spending on defense, right? So when he starts spending all this money on defense and cutting the taxes, now America, the government, is not getting a lot of money back because there's no taxes, right? He cut a lot of the taxes. A lot of people aren't getting taxed. So all of this spending, with all this not bringing money in with cut taxes, results in a deficit. So you know what a deficit is. A deficit is when the amount of the government spending exceeds its revenues, exceeds the amount of money that it gets back. And when that happens, the government really starts to lose money. Right? So that's between 1980 and 1984. This is his idea. Now, Reaganomics didn't really take hold very quickly during the beginning of the 1980s. Many Americans felt that his plan was failing, but still in 1984 he was able to win the presidency against Walter Mondale. Walter Mondale chooses Geraldine Ferraro as his running mate, the first woman, and you can see it does not work well. I think it looks like they win only one state, Mondale's home state of Minnesota, and Reagan wins everything else. A landslide. 525 out of the 538 electoral votes get to Reagan, because right during this time, from 1984 to 1988, which is the midpoint, remember, Reaganomics doesn't take hold in the beginning. It starts taking hold in the middle to the end. So by this point in time, the economy starts doing good, but then it really starts to boom in 85 through 88. Two other things that happened during Reagan's presidency during this time is what we call perestroika on the right, which is the reconstructing of the Soviet Union, and what we have going on in the Iran-Contra affair. There's Reagan standing in front of an American flag with some guns. Well, you can guess it has to do with guns for sure. So Reagan supported anybody who was anti-communist. At this point in time, Russia's really starting to fail. The Cold War is starting to swing in our favor. So these anti-communists in Central America, Reagan supported them, and he sent aid there as they fought their civil war. So they were fighting their wars, and Reagan's was sending aid down there. So Congress passes this amendment that says, in 1984, that says the United States cannot aid these Contras. That's what they're called. They cannot aid these Contras in Nicaragua who were fighting against their government, because these Contras are anti-communist, and Reagan supported that. So here's what we have in the Iran-Contra affair. It was exposed that some U.S. officials had continued to send aid to Contras in Nicaragua with illegal sales of firearms to Iran. So remember those Iranians, the guys who held our guys hostage? During Reagan's presidency, we start selling them weapons, and we take the money from selling them weapons, and we start giving it to Contras in Nicaragua. What a story that was. That comes, it breaks the news. It is actually found out that it's connected to Reagan, but then Reagan says it's not connected to him. He is what we call the Teflon president. They call him the Teflon president because nothing really stuck to him. During this time, they start talking about, President Reagan, do you know anything about this Iran-Contra? I do not recall. That was like his famous phrase, I don't remember, I do not recall, right? So he started aiding these Contras with money from firearm sales with Iran. And another thing that happens about his foreign policy is perestroika. He doesn't necessarily do it, but Mikhail Gorbachev, the head premier of Russia, the Soviet Union, puts this into place. So President Reagan goes to Soviet Union on many occasions. He goes to Germany, right, on many occasions. He starts talking to Gorbachev about, don't have these arms negotiations. And he really expands the U.S. military, especially with Star Wars. It's called Star Wars. It's our attempt at a defense against nuclear weapons. Remember that name, Star Wars, because that's very, very important. And Gorbachev becomes a new Soviet leader. He begins a process of political reform called perestroika. That's how that's pronounced. It's not a cool Russian rock band. It's his reform, political reform, and economic reform for Russia. Now, Reagan sees Gorbachev's desire for change, and he attacks. It's like a soft underbelly. He attacks that. So he signs the Intermediate Range of Nuclear Forces Treaty. This eliminates more medium-range nuclear weapons in Europe. So this type of thing that's going on with the United States and Latin America, with these problems. But then on the flip side, he is succeeding in the Soviet Union. He is succeeding in things like Star Wars, his defense initiative, and spending lots and lots of money on American defense. Ronald Reagan is what most Republicans feel as the most successful Republican president. A lot of theories today are still based upon Reaganisms, I guess you could call them. Many Americans believe that Reagan was the man who knew what was going on in the 1980s. He was the president that we needed in the 1980s. He took a firm hold. He is the one that tells Premier Gorbachev, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down these walls, right? Tear down the walls of communism. Tear down the Berlin Wall. It doesn't happen under Reagan. He leaves in 1988, and then we get the first George Bush into office, his vice president. But these are the type of things that happen underneath Reagan. The Cold War pretty much is really at its end. It doesn't officially end under Reagan, but Star Wars, his defense initiative, telling Gorbachev to tear down the Berlin Wall, everything anti-communism, the Iran-Contra affair, Reaganomics, trickle-down economics, supply-side theory. That's going to be Reagan. And the next chapter you're going to get into is George W. Bush until today. Watch your review video and take your test. Good luck.